J.D. Vance's journey says a lot about politics. Take a look.
Both on the left and the right, there's a movement to sort of gloat over the fact that the elites were right about Donald Trump, right? I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
Long before becoming vice president, or even a senator, J.D. used to go on interviews as an aspiring author to promote his book. But 6 years later, he'd do a complete 180.
I regret them, and I regret being wrong about the guy. I think that he was a good president.
That's why today, we're taking a closer look at what really went on behind the scenes. Because we're not here to blindly follow parties. We're here to push common sense. So, if you're an independent thinker, hit the subscribe button, and let's jump right into it.
So, as a conservative who thinks that Trump does not have the answers and isn't qualified to be president, what are you going to do this election, if you don't mind saying?
My current plan is to vote either third party, or as I joke to my wife, I might write in my dog, because that's about as good as it seems. But, you know, I think there's a chance, if I feel like Trump has a really good chance of winning, that I might have to hold my nose and vote for Hillary Clinton. But at the end of the day, I just feel like she is so culturally disconnected from the people that I grew up around that it would be very, very hard for me to cast my ballot for her. So ultimately, I think I'll probably vote third party. I might vote for this new guy who I really like, Evan McMullin, who I actually met the other day. But I think that I'm going to vote for. I'm going to vote third party because I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place. And ultimately, I just don't share Hillary Clinton's politics.
For context, this interview happened in August 2016, just 2 months after J.D. released his best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy. At the time, Vance was doing the media rounds and openly trashing Trump, calling him anti-conservative, anti-American, morally reprehensible, and even once wrote that he goes back and forth between thinking Trump is a cynical a-hole like Nixon, who wouldn't be that bad and might even prove useful, or that he's America's mustache man. That's not a throwaway insult. That's a full-throttle rejection. And to see someone go from that to playing the loyal defender of Trump raises serious questions. It suggests one of two things. Either J.D. Vance was trying to sell books and ride a media wave, or he has no real convictions to begin with. Either way, it's not a good look. What makes this flip even more absurd is how Democrats today use that same language about Trump. They see him as the villain of modern politics, and nothing in this world would change their opinion. Simply put, that kind of stance doesn't just fade. Yet somehow, Vance managed to pull a complete turnaround, even though he once opposed not just Trump's personality, but many of his policies, which is something he made clear during an interview with Charlie Rose.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. And I've noticed this willingness from people who think a lot like I do that, look, we told you so. To all these white working class voters, we told you so. We told you that Trump was going to be a terrible candidate. We told you that you were an idiot if you voted for him. The problem is, if you take that attitude of sort of gloating over Trump's defeat, then you're playing into the very thing that gave rise to Trump in the first place, which is a feeling that the elites think that they're smarter than you and just think you're a bunch of idiots.
Now, you have said one of the great predictors of whether you'll be attracted to Donald Trump is whether you are pessimistic or optimistic about the future.
That's right.
If you're pessimistic about the future, you'll vote for Donald Trump.
That's right. One of the biggest drivers of Trump's support, and one of the things that's most predictive of his support, is that you express cynicism about the future and a belief that your kids...
That's what he gives voice to every time he makes a campaign stop.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about the way that he talks about...
your cynicism is appropriate.
Absolutely.
Because those people don't care.
Absolutely. You think about the slogan, "Make America Great Again." The implication is that America isn't great right now, and if you're very unhappy about your life, that's going to resonate. I think that this election is really having a negative effect, especially on the white working class, right? Because I think a lot of these grievances are legitimate, but what it's doing is it's giving people an excuse to point the finger at someone else. It's point the finger at Mexican immigrants or Chinese trade or the Democratic elites or whatever else. And sometimes these villains are legitimate. I think it's totally fair to say that the policy elites of the Democratic Party haven't been totally concerned about the white working class. But at the same time, fundamentally what's going on and what Donald Trump has done is change the focus of the white working class from a sort of engaged and constructive politics to a politics of pointing the finger.
So he's basically against pointing fingers at different segments of society, saying that they're the root of all our problems. Fast forward to today, and that's exactly what he's doing. Now, to be fair, some might argue that Biden's open border policies changed his perspective, especially with the sheer number of migrants entering the country. And that's a valid point, but it brings us to the bigger question. How did someone who didn't just dislike Trump, but outright rejected his policies, end up becoming his VP pick? To answer that, we have to take a step back and look at Peter Thiel, the Silicon Valley billionaire who also happens to be a major Republican mega donor. JD and Peter go way back, with Politico reporting as early as 2011 when Vance, then a student at Yale Law School, attended a talk by Thiel in which he tied Silicon Valley's failure to deliver truly revolutionary technologies to the stagnation of America's political and social elites. With JD even telling Politico magazine that if there's something interesting going on, and I want to bounce ideas off a very fascinating and knowledgeable person, I'll give him a call. But it doesn't end there. Because after Hillbilly Elegy's success, Vance went on to become a venture capitalist, working at Mithril Capital, which was co-founded by Peter. He also made a $15 million contribution to JD's 2022 Ohio Senate campaign. But before that, Peter did something that changed the course of history. He's well known to be Trump's go-to guy in Silicon Valley. And according to the New York Times, he set up a meeting between the Don and JD in February 2021 at Mar-a-Lago to secure the president's endorsement for the Ohio Senate race. Trump, being Trump, reportedly pushed JD on his past comments, for which he apologized. And just a few months later, he publicly backtracked on them during an interview with Fox, completing his transformation from critic to loyalist.
Sure. Well, like a lot of people, I criticized Trump back in 2016, and I'd ask folks not to judge me based on what I said in 2016, because I've been very open about the fact that I did say those critical things, and I regret them, and I regret being wrong about the guy. I think that he was a good president. I think he made a lot of good decisions for people, and I think he took a lot of flack. And as you probably appreciate, Alicia, I've taken a lot of flack myself over the last few years for standing up for the president's voters, but also standing up for the agenda. And I think that's the most important thing, is not what you said 5 years ago, but whether you're willing to stand up and take the heat and take the hits for actually defending the interests of the American people, because that's what this business of politics should be all about.
And that interview was just the start. JD went on to do several more, distancing himself from his past criticisms and openly praising Trump. It wasn't just damage control, it was a calculated shift. Vance has a sharp sense of public timing and knows how to seize the moment. That instinct helped him carve out a space in a crowded political field and ultimately win his Senate seat. Once in office, he fully embraced the MAGA line, quickly becoming one of the most famous voices within the movement, helping shape a new wave within the Republican Party. Then came 2024, and Trump picked him as a VP candidate. People were quick to dig up JD's past comments, and he'd constantly get asked about them, even during the vice presidential debate.
Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed.
That's kind of funny. especially when you consider that private messages of his were released by the Washington Post, in which JD says Trump has just so thoroughly failed to deliver on his economic populism. But it's fair to say many people were misled by constant media coverage. When someone's in the headlines 24/7, forming a skewed opinion isn't exactly rare. And yes, admitting you are wrong can be a sign of maturity. But what if there's more to it? Becoming vice president, especially under Trump, is a fast track to the presidency. Trump is nearing the end of his political run, while Vance is only 40. Timing matters. And let's be honest, our political system rewards strategic flip-flops. You may disagree with your side's actions, but you fear the alternative even more. So you hold your nose and play along. Kamala Harris did something similar, backtracking on policies she once embraced just to appeal more to voters. So the real question isn't whether JD changed, it's why. Did he genuinely evolve, or did he pivot for power, betting that loyalty would open bigger doors? I'd love to know your thoughts on this, so let me know in the comments down below. And if you want your friends to get their coverage from an independent source like us, share the video with them. That's how we end the grip of partisan media outlets. Remember, keep thinking.